remember when we did faces? We did a little watercolor faces. So
Yes.
we're doing the
That
whole
was
body.
fun.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm moving on to the whole body.
Great.
So I'm just going to share my screen with my iPad. Okay, everyone. So this is what I've got as a starting point. I'm just going to move that around. So what we did before was paint little shapes for the head, and we left little mouth shapes. Well, today I'm just trying out painting little shapes that would be just generally the torso of a character. Okay, so and I've tried to paint the same shape multiple times so I can create multiple characters. Okay, and what I want to do is explore little body variations that I can do with the same starting point. Okay, and this is all just looking at character design and having exploring, just trying lots of different variations in character design and having the confidence of finding means of exploring different variations, which might be, which in this case, kind of body shape, head shape, limb shape, length, proportion between all those things, not being afraid to do outrageous things and explore that. And the idea is also, and I mentioned this before, especially those who have done illustrating people, how it's easier to paint out the shape of a body than it is to agonize around the outline, drawing the outlines of things. And the same way we used the brush for, we use the direction of the brush in different ways to help us draw stems and leaves, and the same can apply to limbs as well. Okay, so for example, I'm going to have a go at drawing. So I've got my paints here, if you're wondering what I'm doing. So just going to get that little bit of blue in there. I'm getting my paints. So I'm going to take this first shape and pointing my brush in a particular way, I'm going to draw a leg and another one. So this is how my character is starting. So taking that, the original shape being the torso, sort of from shoulder down to waist, and just playing around with the limbs. And because I've got multiple shapes that I can try, doesn't matter if one is a kind of failed attempt. I've got a few more to try. I can get into a rhythm and I can do a lot of these sheets if I want. And the things you've got to consider are obviously the limbs, the neck, the head, the proportion of all those things. Also put in some feet. Now, not everyone's used to doing this, I do understand that, but that's your basic kind of checklist. And I always think if you just start with the legs or with the arms as starting point, that's not a bad starting point. I tend to go with the legs first. And then when you do variations, you can say, oh, what shall I do? Now, sometimes when I do these exercises, I notice people, they start, they're a bit uncomfortable. They're not used to doing it. They think it's a bit of a test. So they fill these shapes in as quickly as possible with whatever their hand does, and take your time. If you want to walk away from it and think about it and go, just little things like, what can I do differently? Well, what if I make the legs a lot thicker? What if I make the legs half the length of the previous legs? What if I just have a pair of shoes? Point coming out of, what does that do? Okay, so take your time. Don't just rush. Have a think about it. Go and look at some illustration or look at some bodies and think about that. So try not to rush it like you're just like it's some kind of little test or a time test. It's none of those things. So you can just take your time. And some of them may look utterly ridiculous. Don't worry about that. That's perfectly fine, whatever's coming out of your head. But try, you know, just take your time and then just also be analytical about it. Look at what you've done, think about it, and think about what could I change? What would be interesting to change? What does this shape speak to me? What kind of, so I've got thin legs. I've got, maybe if I use my brush in a slightly different way, and I get slightly different legs. What if I make sure my legs are doing something a little more interesting than just standing there like that? And likewise with the arm, what if I put it up here? And if you're worried about hands, you can just put a little blob there and not worry about it. I'm not really concerned about it in hands exact. Might even do this, and you might suddenly think someone's waving for a bus. Not that you'd want to get on a bus right now, but back in the day.
Yeah.
The head in like that. So trying little variations like so. So that's the basic kind of task. So finding a shape, putting it a few times on the page, and then developing that. And here's one I did earlier. And little tips. So those of you completely new to all this, I understand I'm sort of jumping in, not necessarily at a beginner's point, but this is just an exercise I wanted to try out in this. But little things to look out for, proportion-wise, the larger the head in proportion to the body, the younger the character will look, because younger bodies, their heads are bigger in proportion. Okay, so notice the proportion, sorry, that was my doorbell. Notice the proportion of the head to the body here compared to here. And I'd like to think that this, even though we've got no features, might well be a child compared to this. Yeah? So proportion of the head and proportion of the limbs to the body is going to give you an indication potentially of age, or even the kind of humor as well. So characters that are kind of deliberately humorous or deliberately stylized to be so will have big heads as well. And heads, even if you're not meaning to draw a child, a bigger head will generally make your character seem younger. So it's something to think about. A general adult proportion is if you have a body shape, if you have your torso here, the leg length will be about 1/3 longer. So if you take the length of the body here and then add another third or so, then you generally will get an adult proportion between leg and body ratio. That's not the case for everybody. Everybody is different, but that's a general ratio. And hands, particularly on an adult, will generally hang sort of around the top of the thigh. So if you've got arms coming down, something to think about. You don't have to be like that. You might decide to have your arms bending all the way around the page, like here, and being 4 meters long if you wanted them to be. Okay, these are done with gouache. These ones, hence why they're quite flat. I would say that gouache isn't necessarily the best material for this. It's good to have maybe a more fluid material so that you've got more of a flow in terms of when you're trying to paint. It can become a little more arduous and time consuming with gouache and not as freeing maybe. What you do end up is lovely flat, generally flat shapes. But if you are going to use gouache, make sure you kind of wash it down so it's nice and fluid. But I think it works rather nicely in watercolor or ink so that you get these little overlaps. I think they give a lot of nice variation to it. So again, that was the same shape, so you can see the original shape here. So you would let that dry and do a few sheets, and then you can add to them like so. Okay, and if you want to orientate differently as well, I've put this one in profile because I was essentially running out of ideas to do that. Okay. And then some shapes you don't have to. The shapes I've done there are all sort of top straight down. So this was more of a bean shape. So I'll draw it. It was more of a shape like that, so it naturally had more movement to it. So if you change the nature of your shape a little bit, then it might elicit other ideas in terms of how you put things down. And don't be afraid to play around with proportion here, or exaggerating. It's all grist to the mill, I think, in terms of playing around that. You should feel free to do that. You should feel free to make a complete horlicks of it, as we would say here. You'll do some which are hideous to your eyes. That's fine, that's part of the process to do that. Last but not least, just these ones here, again, the same shape. Now, once you've done that, the little challenge I have is now I know when we were doing faces, I got you to draw or paint directly on what you had coloured or the shape you had created. Now, I don't want you to do that this time. If you're comfortable with this next stage, you can do it. If you find this next stage I'm going to introduce a bit daunting, then do just draw on these and play around with them. That's fine. Whichever way kind of suits you, if you're interested in doing this at all. But what I'd like you to do is take one of the pages, the page, if you do a few, or even if you just do one, then you don't have a choice. And I would like you then to sketch out using a pencil, sketch out that page. So you might end up with something like that. Now I haven't been exact in terms of the sizes of those, but I've just tried to get the general shape. And what I want to do here is, with these watercolors, we've just got the basic body shape dynamic. Yeah, and what I want you to explore in developing your character is, first of all, concentrating on body shape dynamic. Before you get lost in details and characters and getting things in the right place or whatever, just dealing in that basic body dynamic. And then you can develop from there. One thing that I find quite useful at this stage is to deliberately use a pencil that's a little bit blunt. So I've got a pencil here that's sort of creating a slightly blunter line. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. So instead of a sharp line, if I turn it over, just having this soft blunt line here. Just going to zoom out slightly. And I find this quite a useful mark to have when I'm trying to sketch out the characters. So if I was doing that middle, this character shape here, I'm just trying to get that body shape dynamic, and with my soft blunt pencil, I'm not getting too precious about my line. I'm just very gently sketching out the shape, and because it's nice and soft and because it's got that nice blunt mark, I feel as if I'm sort of exploring the shape without being too definite, not committing myself too soon. And I can always go over it and define it more strongly later. So it's just allowing me to be nice and free. I can even do things like that if I find it easy to just block in those arms initially. I can always come back and draw a line afterwards if I want. So I'm just trying to sketch out those characters, but just dealing in the basic body shapes and proportions. Like so. And if I want to define these more strongly, I can then take a sharper bit of my pencil if I want to do that, get a sharper line, or I can always get another pencil, stronger, darker pencil, and I can define them a little more strongly there. So I do recommend a softish pencil, slightly blunted, just to explore the initial shape and get a nice kind of rhythm with it. And then we've got these. Okay, so once you've done this, I'd like you to choose one of them and you're going to develop that further. And how you're going to develop that further is simply just to draw it out again, but try variations of what that character could be. Okay, so ta-da. Okay, so at this point, it could be anything. You know, and you might have ideas. You might see a gender straight away. You might not. You might be very non-specific about that. You might see a type, a personality. I think it's quite aggressive. You might see an age. You might see that and do variations of that. I approach this quite openly, but you, at this point, you can make decisions. So if you decide your shape is definitely female, you might do 3 female variants. Yeah, if you decide that character is definitely, or you want it to be an age, an older character, then you can have variants. I've been quite open in terms of age and potential gender in these, but you don't have to be that open at this stage. You can narrow it down at this point if you want. Okay, but it's interesting to see, you know, how you have the same head shape and come up with different things, and it's well worth kind of playing around with that. And little things might start coming in, and how you define the clothing, and this one's barefoot, this one has got some footwear, and so on. So once you've gone through this, I would then like you to take one of these and see if you've got time to develop that further. Okay. And you can start shifting things if you want, and you can start, I've started here, so maybe changing the stance a little bit because by this point, I'm getting very used. One of the things is you're getting very used to the body shape by this point because you're drawing it out 4 or 5 times, and things might start to occur to you. So at some point, this body shape has started to communicate kind of fighting to me, that this character is definitely ready for a fight because of the body position. There's something about the clothing as well. I don't know why my unconscious is sort of whirring away. So there's something slightly confrontational about the character, and I've started to develop that from there. And then it starts to get a life of its own. And I've got up to this point. You can take it further. You might not get to this stage, but those are just creatively some stages that you can go through. Okay, I'll just do a quick reminder. So start with this exercise, then choose a selection of characters, sketch them out with pencil, choose one that you particularly like, develop that a little further, take a development and start to get to know that a little bit more. And if you inclined to, you can maybe start moving it around. You don't have to move it around as radically as that. You could just start moving limbs and arms, but that might be a bit way off for some of you. If all of this process of sketching and drawing in pencil is a bit too much for some of you, the other simpler option is just to do what we did in class, similar with the faces, and just to take your character and just start drawing directly onto them and see where that takes you. That's just a little simpler thing to do, which might be accessorizing, if you see fit. And playing around with those, and that's, you know, satisfying in itself as well, and just maybe a slightly less daunting way for some of you who might find the other process a little bit much at this stage. You can do this, and what's fun about this is clothing them, of course. It's like having a doll. You never tire of dolls. Yeah. Okay. And just having that. So dressing up. Who doesn't like a bit of dressing up? And you can do that. So once you've maybe drawn a character up like this, then an option is to sketch this character out. So you can define it, detail it up here, and then maybe sketch it out on a separate piece of paper and continue the process that I discussed with the other method from that stage. So that's just a kind of maybe simpler way of going about it. So it'd be fun to sort of draw on your painting here, and then see if you can sketch that character out again independently of any of the paint shapes. And that's a variant. That was the end of the demonstration part of this particular online session. Thank you very much for watching.